I'm going to say that all of your suspicions are very, very much justified in my role with that angle on NXT. E. I think you're in the right over there. What's up, everyone else? I am Rob. This is the Nocturnal Knockout. It's been a couple of weeks. Been on a little bit of a hiatus. Had to take care of some business 1 week, and then I had to do some wrestling related non-podcast stuff last week, which I will show you guys in just a minute. How are you guys living? How's life been the last half a month? It's like I haven't talked to you since post Backlash. Didn't even get to talk to you guys post Saturday night's main event. Hell, I think this week we could have talked post AEW Double or Nothing or Battleground or something, but I kind of flagged out on those, so we didn't get to speak. But I'm glad we're talking now. In case you guys don't know, I am Rob. My last name is somewhat similar to the one that's spelled right there in the lower third. But if you want to find me on social media, you can with the little @ symbol underneath, Rob's MV. Go ahead and give me a follow on there. I'm just such an interesting follow. I think I've had like 2 tweets into the last 3 years. Go ahead and smash that follow button. More importantly, go ahead and follow all of our Brass Ring media related properties. And go check out everything. Because even if I'm gone for 2 weeks, if I'm on my own AEW side quest, as I was on last week, or I got other business to take care of, there's plenty to do to fill up your content space right here on within Brass Ring Media, especially with the new YouTube lineup. We got new people, some legends on the channel. In addition to the legends that already exist, like myself, Zach Hadorn, Tyler Sage, Ashley, Dominic, other legends. There's other legends to be added. And so I'll take you for about the next hour, maybe right till the top of AEW's Dynamite, because I'm sure you guys all want to get to watch that show after what we saw on Sunday night. Now, I should catch you guys up just a little bit. What was I doing last week when I should have been here breaking down all of the ins and outs of everything happening in pro wrestling? E, to your question, the one time he yells Taz's name in the build to that feud, when the lights go out and it's just Sabu over there and he goes, Taz. That's my favorite Sabu moment. More favorite than any other crazy bump he took into barbed wire, anything he went through a table, anything like that. I'll take that. Last Wednesday, though, as you can see, I was having myself an AEW time. Oh, yeah. I was at a Dynamite Collision taping. See, because here's the dirty little secret these days, guys. Now that Dynamite and Collision are being run in quote-unquote smaller venues, those of us who live near smaller venues are really starting to benefit. Some of us only have smaller venues to offer. And I got to say, we were able to 3/4 fill up this smaller venue to what was a pretty entertaining Wednesday night of AEW Dynamite last week. Now, I'm not going to break down the Dynamite taping because you guys already saw Dynamite. You guys saw Collision the next night. It wasn't even on Saturday. So I'm not going to break any of that down. But I do want to share some photos from my sabbatical. I just got to explain my absence, right? Got to bring in my doctor's note. So you can see Hangman ready to engage in his epic promo with Will Ospreay. You see the Bucks of Youth hanging out, the EVPs, who had several appearances on the night, include walking right in front of where I was sitting. And my biggest takeaway was, holy hell, Claudio is freaking huge. That's not really breaking news. We all knew that Claudio is a big dude, but good God, in person, he's massive, massive. And finally, the last little bit that I will share with you, as I was trying to take the photo over the guy in the CM Punk shirt, which that's a bold move. I love people wearing CM Punk shirts to AEW events. Feels appropriate. I got to see the official merger between the Hurt Business and MJF. Also, a pretty cool Dustin promo in there. But the main thing was seeing the MJF join the Hurt Business. Those were basically the highlights of my excursion over at AEW. I think from a wrestling perspective, obviously there were more matches on Collision. So Collision was a little more entertaining from a wrestling perspective, and there wasn't a ton of storyline for this go home edition. See, I wasn't one of the lucky people that didn't get essentially a pay-per-view night because of overflow from the pay-per-view. No, they were not going to give Albuquerque matches that Phoenix could have had. They were not doing that last Wednesday. So everything on Double or Nothing stayed on Double or Nothing. You wanted to put the Ospreay Hangman match on a Wednesday night AEW from Albuquerque? Be my guest. I would have loved to have seen that. But I'll settle for the great promo we got instead. But it made me think. And I don't like to think often, but I will on occasion. And what I'm thinking about is the current state of, well, wrestling. Now, that's a big topic, the current state of wrestling. There's so much that we can get into. And when it comes to wrestling, often people are using the term wrestling synonymous with WWE. But I don't want to use it in that context here. I want to talk about wrestling itself and how healthy wrestling is at the moment. I would say from a health perspective, wrestling is very happy, very healthy. You have two major promotions seemingly doing very, very well. We can nitpick where they need to improve, where they've declined, what one is doing better than the other. But at the end of the day, and this wasn't always the case in the last 20 years, you have two major national promotions running multiple weekly television shows and putting on fairly regular pay-per-views, usually without incident. Now, that might not seem like something that's that great or that admirable, but we've seen over the years that that's not always the easiest thing to do. Should I mention the iPay-per-view era disasters that Ring of Honor had back in the 2010s? Doing what these companies are doing is not easy, and I applaud them for that. What's up, Fernando? Long time no see. But it got me thinking a little deeper after going to AEW, after experiencing everything that happened with the pay-per-view this weekend, and quite frankly, engaging in some of the WWE discourse over the past weekend. Speaking of, let's look at a little bit of that WWE discourse. So I'll have to text you about that later because that's not something I really want to give away on air. But what I have here is a little collection for you. It's a collection of a sampling of some headlines that have made their way recently. Now, granted, a lot of this is user-generated content, which, I mean, you're watching user-generated content, so you guys are the suckers. But it gets a bit of the sentiment with an actual report. What do we have here? WWE ticket prices out of control. What really went wrong with WrestleMania 41? And the thumbnail there with a 1-star rating, worst WrestleMania build ever. And in the upper right-hand corner, WWE announces WrestleMania 42 will no longer be held in New Orleans, city to host Money in the Bank instead. Let's pause there for just a second. That venue switch, now that was something. That was an old timer by WWE to pivot away from New Orleans, who I don't feel bad for. Like, I feel bad for any of you if you already made travel plans, which I know a few of you had. I think Zach had mentioned that as well. If you've made travel plans, first off, good on you for getting it done early. Like, shout out to you for being on your game. Second of all, that sucks. I hope you bought refundable stuff, but you make the travel plans for a reason. And I'm going to guess this isn't always the case. I only went to one WrestleMania, kind of a one-off, the only time I can afford it. But if you are making the trek to if you were planning on making the trek out to New Orleans this year, I would say it is fairly likely that you made it out to Vegas last year. Now, I'm such a great wrestling commentator, fan, supporter that I made it to Vegas the week before WrestleMania this year and left the week before it, because that's just what I did. That was what that was. I got no problem on his face with WrestleMania being in Vegas. In fact, it's probably my preferred location for WrestleMania, even though I didn't go this year. There's so much to do around there. There's so many events, as you could tell. Even with WWE, it was a lot different the way they were able to integrate a lot of their side events just into the tourist entertainment that happens. So I'm not going to hate on them having a presence in Las Vegas, taking up essentially a residency. Hell, AEW only had to move their Vegas residency this year because WWE went and played like it's an actual music act, went and basically burnt out the territory, for lack of a better term, back in WrestleMania season. So it would have been ridiculous, especially for something that is marketed as a fly-in event. It was not. It was not. Something that's marketed as a fly-in event like that, you're going to want to change the venue, for the things being as close as they are. So that also made sense. But that one is, to me, the most interesting in this avalanche of what feels like, I wouldn't say negative headlines. WWE was getting negative headlines last year. When the guy who was supposed to be running everything was accused of sex trafficking, and the feds were coming down, and all that. Those were negative headlines. I know WWE feels like they had a good year last year, which they did. I'm not saying that they're wrong for feeling that, but the general consensus, right, was that WWE had a good year. 2 + 2 might equal 4 in this situation, and the absolute entire removal of Vince might be to blame as to why WWE had perceived to be such a quality year last year. But make no mistake about it, they were cooked in the headlines in a pretty significant way. This year, if you were to peruse those same type of headlines, I don't know if you would get such negative reactions. But that doesn't mean that wrestling fans, WWE fans, seem to be particularly happy with the promotion at the moment. Over the last few weeks, there has been tons and tons and tons, and I'm not saying that to be over-exaggerating because it feels real. It feels like every morning you open your phone and there's another thing that WWE is doing or has done that is just driving people nuts. Such as their ridiculous ticket prices. Now, most of us were never going to be in position to pay, what was it, like $30,000 or whatever it is to sit front row at SummerSlam. Boy, that main event better be pretty damn good if I'm going to pay that much for a ticket. Most of us were never going to be in a position to even afford whatever the ticket was going to be at a normal face value. I get that. But the price hikes seem to be yet another data point in this overall, as Fernando is putting there in the chat, very, very astute, this alienation of the fans that doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. Now, I don't think WWE is a unique monolith in this sense. I think WWE is actually mirroring the behavior of a lot of corporations at the moment. In case you haven't realized, a lot of things kind of suck right now in terms of purchasing and the economy and the customer experience. Think about where wrestling these days is housed. It's primarily housed on these streaming services. Now, I'm not saying they're like dentists or insurance salesmen or, I don't know, lawyers, teachers. Think of what other profession you just can't stand the people involved in that profession. Think of these things that you have negative opinions of, like your streaming service, I want to say. All those things seem very unworkable these days. In particular, your streaming services. Anything you got to pay just a couple bucks a month for right now feels like it either costs too much, doesn't work right, or just simply isn't fan friendly. And that's what I'm getting at here. Right now, AEW seems to be in a situation. AEW. Freudian slip. WWE, scratch that. WWE seems to be in a situation where they are alienating their fans by taking them for granted, by bilking them at every corner. Now, what does all of this mean? Does this mean that there's going to be some big mass exodus from WWE? History says not really. WWE tends to build up a large fan base, and through poor decisions or turning off their fans can erode that fan base, but it is rare that the decline happens all at once. I mean, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, you do get like a Backlash 01 that might be a major indicator that business is in the tank or is about to tank. But even back then, it doesn't happen at once. It's not like there's a day that wrestling being hot or being the most important thing or being very profitable or being very fan friendly, there's not like a specific day that gets cut off. But what happens is these deaths by 1,000 cuts. And as WWE is becoming more and more fan unfriendly, it actually leaves your brain to wonder if there are other options. Now, the last thing I would ever want to do is turn this into some kind of discussion of WWE versus AEW. Because this is the internet, and y'all don't know how to handle that type of discourse handle it responsibly. No. Anytime anyone compares or contrasts AEW and WWE, it becomes a fight to the death, as if the people who are defending each side have to prove their wrestling identity or something. It's very, 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 very weird. Does not echo Monday Night War sentiment at all. Monday Night War was, well, there were fans on each side. It was more of an open competition for your services, or at least it felt like. With the AEW WWE split, it's just you pick a side. That's the side you're on. That's the only side you can ever be on. And there is no room for nuance. There is no room for discourse. I don't want to say that, and I don't want to get into that. And also, let's face it, it's not like WWE is going to go out of business tomorrow. But as noted by the possible Vegas residency, by everything else that's happened over the last couple of months, they do start to engender negative feelings, and maybe, just maybe, they won't have so many super fans, and that only becomes relevant when there is truly an alternative. I want to put Fernando's chat up on here, and he said, remember what happened to boxing? They started messing with the fans too much, and look at it now. And I think boxing is a great analog. No one would argue that boxing as a sport feels particularly healthy. However, for a big fight, you can certainly draw a crowd. You can certainly, depending on who it is and the circumstance, you might be able to make a little bit of money off a pay-per-view. And so for the promoter of that boxer, of that title, I think it can be argued, oh, boxing is doing great. Boxing's healthy. But it's also much less part of the cultural experience than it ever was prior to any other time in history, despite the sport, I'll agree, seeming like it's in a fairly healthy place. I've been saying all this to note that there currently is an alternative. Now, again, I do not want to make this WWE versus AEW. But I brought out all of those headlines about all the disgruntled feelings that people have within WWE. And I couldn't believe it this week. For the first time in a while, it's like a deluge of positive AEW headlines, which I didn't know in 2025 if that was even a possibility anymore. It felt like everything had become so toxic for the AEW brand that they would never be able to seize back upon the momentum that they had. Now, again, I want to go back to my original point. Because I am pointing out the good things that AEW is doing does not mean that WWE is in the tank, is going out of business, is losing all their fans. I'm sure they will set records at SummerSlam. I'm sure they will set records at WrestleMania. I'm sure they'll set records at the next Raw that you pay too much to go to. I am not worried about them as a company. I am pointing out, though, that there is a little bit of a different trajectory right now that both companies have in terms of how their fans generally feel. Now, I should clarify here, because while the discourse on AEW has gone through about 2 years of just not feeling great, right? There hasn't been a lot of positive vibes in the public discourse surrounding AEW for sure since 2023, but this goes back obviously to Brawl Out and a little bit before then. Summer of 2022, I would say, was the end of the peak of the good feelings of AEW. Essentially, AEW's honeymoon period from 2019 to 2022 really ended that summer. That's the summer everyone got hurt, everyone stopped getting along, and those Forbidden Door shows were just overbearing on everyone. We also like to forget that the AEW Summer of Discontent was actually kicked off by MJF, but by the time Brawl Out had happened and MJF was kind of back in the fold, I think we all forgot about that, or at least didn't acknowledge it to the same extent. And back in that time period, when AEW felt like its hottest or its most relevant, there is something to be said for what was on the other channel and the other company. WWE creatively, I think you can argue, improved right around that time that AEW started dipping. That coincides almost directly with the transition away from Vince, although if you recall, the initial part of his hiatus still had him kind of around, and there were rumors of his influence on the show, specifically the night after WrestleMania 39. Remember that part of the timeline? That was fun. But part of the fever for AEW, and this is well-worn territory at this point, was because of their dissatisfaction, people's dissatisfaction with WWE. And that had been the case for many, many years. They were pushing people that people didn't care for. They were putting on main events that weren't always the greatest. And the entire tone and tenor of their program seemed to target an audience that wasn't actually watching. Those were some rough, lean years. The entire 2000s are pretty rough and lean. The entire last 20 years since WrestleMania 17 felt like it was a little bit of a rough ride in the company, but the closing of last decade was just god awful. All of those things, all of the issues that you would have with the WWE seemed to coalesce all in one spot. It's not like they got much better during the pandemic, but they did take the focus off of wrestling companies just a little bit as they were trying to, like everyone else, adapt to the new reality that we were living in. But when we come out of that time period, that's right at the beginning of 2022, that is when they start improving. That's when the creative starts improving. And let's be honest, the goodwill started improving at the same time. That's what AEW lost since the summer of 2022. They lost their goodwill. But we're not in 2022 anymore. We're not in 2023 anymore. We're not even in 2024 anymore. If you ask me, WWE has hit a bit of a goodwill peak. They're on the decline. Fans are upset about ticket prices. Fans are upset somewhat about the product and who is being presented. Fans are upset about the changes of venues. Fans in general, you get the feeling, and I say fans who speak up, the vocal fans. Yes, I know they will point to their gate numbers. I'm not discussing that. What I'm saying is the general sentiment. And the general sentiment has been that this is corporate TKO wrestling and it's ruining the company. It's great that we have a guy whose gimmick is that he's here to ruin wrestling. You have a guy at the top of AEW running a similar one. And I think Nick Khan and Triple H may actually be accomplishing this. They do seem to be ruining wrestling. But we talk about complacency Fernando talked about AEW being complacent. WWE was certainly complacent for a number of years after the Attitude Era, just because they lacked competition. And I would guess that WWE does not feel they have competition now. And if you look at the numbers, maybe they really don't. But complacency is when you get fat and happy. Complacency is what causes things to change, what causes focus to shift. And we have to remember, we're not in the same old era that we were in before. The entirety of the company does not revolve around the whims of one man. It revolves around the whims of a corporate board that may or may not want to continue for very long. They want to make all kinds of different decisions. Now, again, I do not think WWE is getting canceled. I do not think Triple H is getting fired next week. None of those things are probably going to happen. But there are people to answer to on that side. And all of this stuff, all of the things that people are so dang angry about, definitely has the feel of a corporate takeover, right? It feels like when your favorite local restaurant gets bought out. Now, WWE was hardly the mom and pop shop a few years ago before TKO took over. In fact, they were already a publicly traded company. And even in the 90s and 80s, as much as they would like to claim, WWE has never been quite the mom and pop shop that they have portrayed themselves as. Neither has AEW. AEW is certainly not a mom and pop shop, and they struggle sometimes when they market themselves as the complete underdog. How many billionaires' kids or millionaires' kids, I don't know how much cash my guy Shot K has. But it's kind of hard to consider them a real underdog. Are they in second place? Yes. Underdog, I would dispute that. But what they do have, they have momentum. They have momentum in the way that they're staging their venues. They have momentum in most of their storylines. They've been killing it with women's wrestling at a much higher level than WWE has for a little while. And that's amazing because that was a weak point that company had. They also, I think for the first time in a long time, are really communicating that the newer stars, the homegrown guys, are about to really, really take off. Yes, I got Mox is still the champion. I know we just dealt with months and months of Cope, Edge, whatever the hell he is, at the top. Jericho was technically in ROH, but he finally got off of our screens. The AEW homegrowns, the more AEW originals, they seem ready to take the mantle, to do all of these things to develop the goodwill. Because at the end of the day, that's what AEW lost. And now I got to throw this question out to you guys before we talk about something different. Does this brand sentiment, especially with AEW, really matter? Because I would say that while, yes, the product has improved quite a bit over the last year, especially in 2025. Now, I don't talk about it all the time, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm the most hardcore AEW guy. I kind of watch in and out. They're getting my attention right now, though. This is one of the times where they're really, really getting my attention. I think they have a lot of things kind of in order. Like Fernando said, that Hangman winning Sunday night was very important. Is he the guy to bring it back in more ways than others? More ways than other. But I want to throw that to you guys. Can you give wrestling brands another chance? Is that something we do as a wrestling fan base? I wouldn't necessarily count WWE in this, although I think they have been affected from this in positive and negative ways. Some people have a really overwhelmingly positive view of WWE. And so that brand in a lot of people's minds is the brand of wrestling, is a positive brand, is a successful brand, is a brand they want to be associated with. Good for them. And I would say AEW, more than any individual storyline, more than anyone being pushed, they've been suffering from perception over the last couple of years. Now, a lot of this was self-inflicted. Brawl Out didn't help. The MJF situation didn't help. Sammy Guevara being in a fight with anyone he's ever met didn't help. Jon Moxley being champion as long as he has may have a hell of a payoff. Hasn't really helped. Tony Khan on Twitter has not helped. Tony Khan's big announcements under delivering has not helped. All of these things and the general just distrust in the product, while another product was getting hot, have I think eroded the, what would you call it, consumer faith in AEW. And I gotta I ask, and as Fernando pointed out, he can give a company another chance. There is that way to go. And as he pointed out, they outlasted WCW, so they're doing something right. Yeah, take that, Eric Bischoff. And as Fernando also points out, TNA is around regardless of all the mistakes they made. But I think TNA is actually the model here. TNA, by all accounts, has had pretty good wrestling for almost like 5 years at this point. And they have got the most amount of positive publicity only over like the last few months when they have partnered up with NXT. How right now the NXT has their champion. So they're essentially a subsidiary of WWE, basically like a more blatant version of what ECW was in the 90s. They didn't get any of that positive recognition though until being associated with another brand with all of its positive recognition. TNA seems to be a good company. TNA has a lot of wrestlers that a lot of people like. There's a lot of wrestlers that you can only see in TNA. The storylines are okay. The wrestling's okay. But for all of the last 5 years, the entirety of like since the Anthem stuff has gone down, TNA's just been a brand that people haven't cared about. People made up their minds after years and years of mistakes. Those mistakes, like Fernando's mentioned, after years and years of mistakes, people have made up their mind that it's a brand that they just don't care for. It's a brand that'll never be good. I know a lot of people that almost root against the existence of TNA. It's an insult to them that this company has stayed around despite, as Fernando mentioned, all of the mistakes. So all of these companies have to be careful to not fully taint their brands, because once it's made up about the brand, and it sounds like very buzzworthy language, but in this case, I think brand is very, very appropriate, because we're not talking about any individual wrestler. We're not talking about Hangman or Ospreay or Mox or anyone. What we're talking about is the feelings that people have about the company, if they're going to give it a chance, if they will put it on equal footing. AEW and WWE were never even really competition in AEW's golden era. But they were competition, I think, for headspace. They were competition for good feelings. They lost a lot of that over the last couple of years. They have a real shot to get it all back. And I hope everyone involved just realizes the opportunity that they have, holds on tight, gets it together, and has a really healthy wrestling company as a result. As you guys have been mentioning in the chat, what we don't want to do is go back to one wrestling company. Life's no fun with one wrestling company, and I don't want to live in that world. Let me take a sip of water and I'll stop talking about AEW. A sample story is on, or a simple story? Good to see you, is on it. I got Ian here, not Azan. I was wondering where all the rest of the regulars were. Hope I haven't alienated too much with my absences. Someone who does comment on wrestling just sent me a text who was watching and sent Tony Khan needs to grab the brass ring right now. Yeah, you might say the moment is there, Tony Khan. Grab that brass ring. It's right over there. You see it? It's right above my head. You gotta grab that brass ring by the throat and choke it. Even as we try to like block Vince out of the memory, he's still his name just comes up constantly, and we have to reference him and make voices. Azan, very, very, very straightforward. Yeah, he's saying AEW's doing a simple story now. No shades of gray. Funny how like anytime a wrestling company does a simple story, we tend to heap praise on it and talk about why it worked. Funny how that works. I don't see why not. I mean, I'm looking forward to all of it. It's super interesting. And again, it kind of ties to the conversation we're having. It feels like another part where everything is very, very overextended, including, AAA being involved. I'm excited to watch Worlds Collide. Um, I don't know if Gable wins the mega title. I don't know. Not willing to make that prediction just yet. If you want to do that though, and hey, Triple A is much, much, much more under the WWE umbrella than we believe TNA is right now, even though WWE has their champion. What if at the end of the day, WWE doesn't end up buying out TNA and they just raid every bit of clout that they have and then just leave them in the dust? That seems like something that would have been done back in the day. But I don't think it's going to happen. Okay, guys. Let's Yeah, Fernando, that's not awkward, is it? And I think with Del Rio, people should probably look into a little more what people are referring to than even just talk about. So I've heard some people say it's an issue of political correctness, just like that. Like, no. Look, Google Mr. El Patron. Yeah, they picked the bones of ECW, used the brand name, bailed them out of bankruptcy court, though, legitimately. So there's that. So yesterday, I don't know if you guys really agree with me. I feel like we had a version of a wrestling death, or at least we lost someone very close to wrestling. For those of you who weren't aware, and I'm sure many of you were, the legendary musician Rick Derringer passed away, I believe, on Monday. He officially passed away, as reported by his caretaker. Now, Rick Derringer had been in poor health for a little while. But this guy, and let me see if I can pull up a photo of Rick Derringer. Rick Derringer is a ridiculously accomplished musician. First off, let's look at just what the Google image search brings up of Rick Derringer. Oh, that's courtesy of Loudwire, and it's going to kill my computer. Look at this photo of Derringer. And you want to tell me this wasn't like one of the coolest dudes ever? That's probably what happened. That's probably exactly what happened. Yeah, so there's Rick Derringer. Now, Rick Derringer's resume is huge when it comes to who he worked with. He was a musician in the 70s and 80s. So, just for context, he's worked with Johnny Winter. He worked with Cyndi Lauper, Weird Al, Steely Dan. Obviously, his band, the McCoys, had some big hits. He was an all-around badass musician, guitar player, songwriter. But I think most wrestling fans, why am I bringing him up? Well, he wrote perhaps the most iconic entrance theme in wrestling history. This is the man responsible for Hulk Hogan's Real American theme. So it really did hearten me yesterday to see so many of the tributes to Rick Derringer, who has a legitimate legacy outside of wrestling, a legitimate like Hall of Fame level musician legacy outside of wrestling. To see him acknowledged for the themes that he had done. And as the boss put in, his other iconic theme is the Demolition theme. So I thought, you know what, let's look at Real American. Let's look at Rick Derringer. let's kind of explore a little bit of this. It's kind of right in the Nocturnal Knockout oeuvre, I would say. Now, what I did find, because Rick Derringer, there's information on him, but he is a celebrity of yesteryear and not a guy that did like a million podcasts. Although he did do some interviews, and there hasn't been a lot on him, but there is some info on Derringer. And so what I decided to do is I threw it in a Google search, looked to see what we could find, and what I found was pretty awesome. What I found was Mel Magazine, which does wrestling content, or did. I think, yeah, they're still a thing. Mel Magazine did a few years ago an oral history of the song Real American. So I want to go through parts of this oral history. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole dang thing to you, but what I am going to do is go through some highlights as noted here and talk about some of the history of the song Real American, the role that Rick Derringer had to play in it, and some nuggets that I got from this as a bit of a tribute, if you will, to Rick Derringer. You know who we're not going to pay tribute to today? We are not paying tribute to the Hulkster, because I don't feel like it. And he doesn't always deserve it. One second, guys. We're getting a little bit of issues right here. There we go. So I'm going to hide that. Bye-bye that version of Hogan up on the stage. And I'm going to invite a new one. This is fascinating audio and podcast stuff. All right, it is what it is. Okay. Never mind, I'm going to have to pull that one. My apologies, everyone. Okay. So an oral history of Hulk Hogan and Real American. So here was the first little nugget from this article from all those years ago. This article came out in 2021, by the way. So it refers to Real American as the most patriotic song ever. Right or wrong, that may be true. Here's the other thing about it. Rick Derringer does sing a version of this, but the man who actually sang on Real American, you know, the guy that's iconic at the beginning, who's just going with that vocal performance on his own, his name was Bernard Kenny. Now, Bernard Kenny, no one's ever been able to track down like all of these years. So nobody knows what the hell's going on with Bernard Kenny. I don't know if he's completely in isolation, but no one's ever really heard from him. If someone could get Bernard Kenny on their podcast, they need to do that, because this is the guy that actually sang the Real American theme, which there are, I'd say, three iconic parts of the Real American theme. There's the lyrics. There's Rick Derringer's amazing guitar work, iconic guitar work. And then there's that vocal performance that's one of a kind. We'll talk about that vocal performance in a little bit. But when you talk about the inspiration for this song, let's hear what Rick Derringer actually had to say. What's up, Maria? Here's what Rick Derringer had to say. My writing partner, Bernard Kenny, and I sat down one night in 1984. We had the idea to write the most patriotic song of all time. We were really proud Americans, and we wanted to express that in the song. So that was the whole objective behind it when we sat down. A few hours later, the song Real American was born. After it was written, we actually played it, and it brought us to tears. We knew that we had done such a good job. It was just destined to be a hit. And that's really interesting, that when you think about the theme of the song and how it plays out and how it's been received over the years. I mean, this song has been used by politicians and campaigns. It gets used everywhere. Let's look at the lyrics, though. Let's see if this really is the most patriotic song ever. Now, patriotism means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So let's break this down lyrically. I am a real American, fight for the rights of every man. I am a real American and fight for what's right. Fight for your life. When it comes crashing down and it hurts inside, you got to take a stand. It don't help to hide. If you hurt my friends, then you hurt my pride. I got to lend a hand. It don't help to hide. So I'm starting to like think about the video and stuff. I'm getting fired up just reading these lyrics, and I'm feeling more patriotic. I am a real American. Okay, we'll go through the chorus here. Well, I stand strong about right and wrong, and I don't take trouble for very long. Because I got something deep inside of me. Courage is the thing that keeps me free. And it gets a little repetitive from there, but that is basically the lyrics of Real American, which, other than the words Real American, hearing that in the context of 2025, I would not necessarily think of that as like a patriotic flag waving song. Again, the I am a real American, but more the fight for what's right, fight for what's inside of me. But again, we're not having the proper context looking at these lyrics in 2025. No, the proper context would be checking this out in the year in which it came out. Now, in terms of the song, why it exists, this is the part that I found really, really entertaining. So let me show you guys something. The reason that Rick Derringer became so involved with WWE and his whole connection is the result of a couple of people. Let me show you who these people are. So that is Cyndi Lauper and her boyfriend at the time, which I am blanking on his name. I can pull it up in like 2 seconds. David Wolf. The man's name is David Wolf. So David Wolf was Cyndi Lauper's boyfriend. Also a great musician. Also an important guy. I mean, look at the guy. Look how happy he looks with Cyndi. You should see the Google photos of this guy. He's got the long, flowy 1980s guitar player locks. This guy knew what was up. So this is literally the rock and wrestling connection. That is where Derringer comes out of. So the rock and wrestling connection is largely established with Captain Lou and Cyndi Lauper. Justifiably so. Cyndi Lauper deserves every bit of flowers she always gets when it comes to launching the wrestling boom. But Rick Derringer has literally some hands in it as well. So Wolf and Derringer, they get commissioned to do one of the most important works in wrestling history. They had, do we have a photo of it there? Yep. They had to produce the wrestling album, an actual release, a full-length LP release with a bunch of wrestling themes and other songs available on it. Derringer was the producer of that album. We associate Derringer with the one song, but he actually produced both versions of the wrestling album, the Pile Driver album. Those are iconic albums. I would refer you to Brian Zane's Wrestling with Regret YouTube channel. He has some great videos on the dynamics of those songs. He has a little bit to play in there. I tried to see what I can get away copyright from in there, and it was too risky, folks. But let's look at this production credit that Derringer has. So on the initial wrestling album, you have A Land of 1,000 Dances, which was written by Fats Domino, actually, sang by several wrestlers. Grab Them Cakes, Junkyard Dogs theme. Real American by Rick Derringer. Eat Your Heart Out, Rick Springfield by Jimmy Hart. Captain Lou's History of Music. Fascinating, obviously credited to Captain Lou. Hulk Hogan's theme from WWF All-Stars. Something else you could find only on YouTube. That was the Hulk Hogan song that's actually on here. For Everybody, which, if you understand what the for really should be and what he's going for, because the cover of it's the cover song, that's Roddy Piper's theme. Tutti Frutti, Mean Gene, excellent. Don't Go Messing with a Country Boy for Hillbilly Jim, and Cara Mia for Nikolai Volkov. That was the original wrestling album, and again, produced by Derringer and by Wolf. and by Steinman, who wrote the Hogan theme. But that is what Real American was on there for. Now, when you read through the oral history, it is made absolutely clear that this was a different song, and they knew it from the beginning. In fact, it was Vince who apparently made the call to not have any wrestlers sing on the song. They knew from all the songs that they had come up with, this was probably their best theme and didn't need to be ruined by, I don't know, Junkyard Dog or Mean Gene or Captain Lou singing on the thing. You got a copy of it, boss? That's awesome. Boss has a physical copy of the wrestling album. So here's what Derringer said about Vince's role. It may have been Vince McMahon's decision to say, go ahead, this is a great song. Let's not jeopardize the quality. Let's not jeopardize its quality with the wrestler not doing it justice. So it may have been Vince's decision to say, you go on and do that one. And then Brawler, who actually played drums on it, Derringer would come in and do the guitar, and I did drums. Then they overdubbed it. It was the only song on the album done by a professional group of people that had nothing to do with wrestlers performing it. So Real American was more of an assembly thing than it was a kinetic magic moment in the studio. Now, another note on this, and we won't read it completely, was noted that when they were recording it, that was the day that, because I guess no wrestlers were featured on it, none of the wrestlers who were in the studio the whole time were in character. He talked about Hogan and Beefcake being involved in one of their feuds and just walking around totally normal backstage. And again, we're talking about the 80s. We're talking about a little more kayfabe than we're used to these days. Now, as some of you guys have noted, Boss, you noted before we even came on the show, the song was not intended to be Hulk Hogan's theme. As much as it fits the Hogan character and everything about Hogan, no, it was actually supposed to go. Where are they? To these guys, the U.S. Express. A blatantly, as it says in the article, American-themed tag team. Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda. Windham Rotunda. No, the legacy of that tag team is not that they once had Real American as their theme. I think their legacy is Windham Rotunda. Very cool. Very, very cool little piece right there. But they left the company. Now, I don't know how Hogan started using this theme. I don't know how perfect it is. And I don't think they delve into it here. Mike Rotunda, yeah, that is Bray's dad. And Barry Windham obviously is his uncle, hence the namesake. I don't know how Hogan ended up with the one theme that was so good. Maybe and maybe it could be by default. To give the Hulkster his credit here, I'm sure he'll lie about it if you ever ask him about it. It was a song that didn't. It's not like Hogan couldn't come out to Junkyard Dog song. That would never made sense. You know what? Never mind. Scratch it. I want that to happen. For Hogan specifically, I want him to come out to Junkyard Dog song. That should happen. That should be a thing. So, and the guys who wrote the song, Brawler, Derringer, they all fully admit that the reason why the song took off the way it did has somewhat to do with the song, but it's really the man that was associated with the song. For better or worse, in the 1980s, Hulk Hogan is one of the biggest celebrities in the world. And everywhere he goes, that song is featured with him. Fernando noting Eye of the Tiger was a pretty sweet song. The original wrestling theme. There's some debate on how much Hulk Hogan is responsible for the invention and the normalizing of wrestling themes. And obviously, if Hulk Hogan's mouth is moving, my man is lying. But I think he's pretty much accurate on that, although I don't think he's like the original pioneer. Like in his book, he says he gave someone like $20 to play Eye of the Tiger before he walked out. And it's like, and now we have entrance themes galore. I don't think that's exactly how that went down, but it even notes in here how not everyone always had a theme. And then now, and Hogan had this theme, and this was the case. And this song really becomes like the soundtrack to the ends of a lot of wrestling events, a lot of big moments. It was used all the time, and it was used in perpetuity. I'm assuming because they probably owned some kind of rights to the song, so they didn't have to keep doing all the things that they have to do to secure songs. Now, there is some talk on here, and this is what I thought was very interesting here. So let me read this out here. The key to a professional wrestling entrance song, and this is Newman, this is a critic, is the same as writing a pop song with hammering home hooks and repeating the same stuff over and over again. It's all about branding and character and sticking to those points in fans' head. The song Real American definitely does that. So for Hogan, there's these catchy melodies, and they're singing about how great of a hero he is, and that he'll fight for what is right. Specifically, he'll fight for you. The song does a great job of setting the stage when Hogan comes out. You know, right then and there, he's the good guy, and you've got to cheer for him. That's another piece too, especially with that guitar lick that's coming, like that is a hero's theme. That basically says daddy's home in so many ways. Derringer said Hulk used it everywhere. Every time he went in the ring, he used it as a theme song. Every time he did a television appearance, he played the song. He created videos. In fact, when we made the original music video with Hulk Hogan, he was playing the bass guitar. Remember, folks, Hogan can play bass. He was never supposed to replace Cliff Burton in Metallica, but he can play bass. He's a bass player, as Derringer noted. I showed him. That's the kind of part we play for the video. And I remember him saying, hey, that's not the bass part you play. Come on, show me the real part. So I showed him what we really played. But in the video, we see Hulk playing that little Fender Stratocaster guitar, and it looks really small in him. You can see it right there. There's the other song, like some of the Vince songs, I think or that one song where Hogan actually is playing the bass. But yeah, he's playing that little Strat right there. It looks tiny. I mean, that's the effect, right? That Hogan is so muscular. It's a little tiny axe, brother. But now here's something he said about that was interesting, where he might have been a little bit of disappointed, not necessarily in Hogan, but we were really happy about all that. This is Derringer. But still, somehow, in the back of my mind, I thought, man, this song should be somehow more legit than just a wrestler's theme song. We wanted to write this fabulous patriotic song for all Americans. We saw it somehow on a different level than a wrestler's theme song. In some ways, I was a little let down. So that's interesting that Derringer actually, even though it was written, I think, pretty explicitly, not written initially, but it was used, and it was known to be used as a wrestling theme song. I think he thought the song was bigger than that. And I get what he's saying. Especially because that song is so associated with one man. One person gets associated with that song. And so it's a wrestler, so it gets associated with wrestling. It talks about some people use it for clout in some ways. Here's Derringer. All of a sudden, Hillary Clinton was running in a primary election against Barack Obama. And I got word that she was using Real American as her campaign song. It's no commentary on Hillary, whether you like her or not, but we were excited because all of a sudden the song had become somehow a lot more legitimate than simply a wrestler's theme song. I heard the same about Newt Gingrich during his 2012 run for president. All 2 weeks of that? You heard about that, Derringer? Here's Newman here. Politicians still use the song in political ads, just like they do with Lee Greenwood and all other songs. It just shows this sort of cartoonish version of the United States. It's hard not to roll your eyes or laugh when you hear it. And here's the last thing we'll say from Derringer. Next, I heard on America's Got Talent, a guy smashed 45 watermelons on his head, and they played it as a victory song. I'm a real American. I can balance 40 watermelons on my head. So we went, wow, this thing is cool. It's growing. Rest in peace, Rick Derringer. I don't know if he's completely aware of it or if he appreciated it in his time, but that was a huge song. That was a legit song. And maybe it wasn't used in the way that he had envisioned it, but I think that slightly undersells the way people interacted with wrestling, the way, whether we like to talk about it in the same context nowadays or not, what Hulk Hogan meant to them. I know it might not seem like it to the guy who wrote the song, but a lot of people thought those big feelings, those feelings of pride, the passion, all of those things that I think a songwriter wants to evoke with their music. Rick Derringer did that probably more than a lot of other artists who have a lot other big hit songs. Because think about how often you hear a wrestling theme. You're hearing that every week. All he talked about all the appearances, all of it. It's just ingrained into your brain. It's Pavlovian, right? With wrestling. What would they do now with the John Cena? I think maybe part of keeping the theme is like, you're gonna chant John Cena sucks, because that's what you do as a result of it. Again, it's Pavlovian. Wrestling things happen, and if they're good, they're great, because they're these earworms that are there forever, and they're a signal of something that's about to happen. So I hope Rick Derringer was able to appreciate his contribution to music, to rock and roll history, before his WWE run, and his contribution to rock and wrestling history in wrestling. Rick Derringer is a very, very important, perhaps unsung hero, along with Jim Johnson and all these other guys, all these other musicians. But there's not another musician that you could quite name just like that had that song that went that big, and it's only a portion of his career. So rest in peace, Rick Derringer. Thank you guys for hanging with me as we took a few little detours this week. Normally we do our deep dive history stuff, our WWE stuff, but coming back from a little bit of a hiatus, I wanted to report on AEW and talk about some of this stuff. And I also wanted to, Fernando, that's great, right? I also wanted to pay our respects to Rick Derringer and to that song. Again, it's an iconic part. I mean, like people like me, I didn't ever get to see Hogan in his prime run. I saw the Hogan nostalgia run, but I hear that song and it's just instantly, it's wrestling time. It's beat the bad guy kind. It's slam the foreign enemy time. It's great stuff. And Rick Derringer, I hope he didn't take the memes and some of the cheesiness that people thought about it. He wrote it in earnest, but I would say, at least in terms of Nocturnal Knockout, we appreciate all your contributions to music and wrestling, Rick Derringer. Well, that's a nice tight hour for us. And I'm getting word in my ear from my producer that Hangman is about to address the audience. And I can't talk about what a turnaround AEW had over the last couple of months and not see Hangman's first big promo after his big win over Ospreay. So, unless there's like a massive catastrophe, or I get tired, or I don't want to do it, or I find something else better to do, I'll be hanging out with you guys next week, and we're going to be going back 20 years and discussing the super implications and still implications of the 2005 WWE draft. Talk to you guys next week, guys. All right, guys. Later.